and from Nehemiah chapter 4, verses 14 to 23. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, "Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes." When our enemies heard that it was known to us and that God had frustrated their plan, we all returned to the wall, each to his work. From that day on, half of my servants worked on construction and half held the spears, shields, bows, and coats of mail. And the leaders stood behind the whole house of Judah, who were building on the wall. Those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand and held his weapon with the other. And each of the builders and his sword strapped on at his side while he built. The man who sounded the trumpet was beside me. And I said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, "The work is great and widely spread, and we are separated on the wall far from one another. In the place where you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us." So we labored at the work, and half of them held the spears from the break of dawn until the stars came out. I also said to the people at that time, "Let every man and his servant pass the night within Jerusalem, that they may be a guard for us by night and may labor by day. So neither I, nor my brothers, nor my servants, nor the men of the guard who followed me, none of us took off our clothes. Each kept his weapon at his right hand." We are continuing on our message series called Community Building. And if we look throughout the Bible, God brings people into community, and those communities develop and grow. Sometimes there's great blessing in the community, sometimes there's great conflict. But throughout that community, when we see people working together, we see the amazing things that God can do as people come together in his name, and as people go and use the gifts that they have been given through God. And as we think about community, I have a question. What is it like to be part of a group? And I hope we've all had that experience to be part of a group. Some of our experiences may be good. Some of our experiences may be a little bit troubling at times. But what is it like to be part of a group? Anything you've noticed?
Sense of belonging.
Sense of belonging. What else?
Participation.
Purpose.
Sometimes conflict because you have different ideas.
Sometimes conflict because you have different ideas. Sometimes the conflict is over the same idea, you just want to do it differently. And conflict can actually be a good thing when it's handled properly, and because conflict can actually bring about the best possible outcome, that you're seeing a fuller picture of what God is doing, and not just sort of being blind or sort of have the blinders on and just doing it one way. But if you can see the fullness of it and work together, conflict can actually bring about something even more beautiful than we first imagined. What other things?
It allows you to use your spiritual gifts.
Allows you to use your spiritual gifts. Being part of a group. And today it's wonderful we have the praise team leading us in singing and music. When we think about the different gifts that are being used here throughout the week, I had one person, and we're recording some music, and the drum set was set up here, and I said, I would have sat down and done it, but I'm not as good as my son. Morgan has a much better was much better at keeping a beat than I am. I kind of add in a few extra ones or go off on my own. And think about when we have different people singing. You can have one person singing, can sound beautiful. You can have more people singing, and you see different elements of the same song coming together and creating something that is similar but also different, and the beauty is just you see the different parts of the song coming forward. When you have different instruments, it adds to the music. So when you have people coming together, using their gifts together, it is adding to what God is doing. And I believe that when we work together, it creates a beautiful picture that God is blessing us with. One of the terms that is often used is the term of working like a well-oiled machine. And when we think about machines, there are different elements working together. When I was my first year of high school, I was in a tech class, and we rotated through all the different tech courses that they had at the school: auto, welding, drafting, wood shop, machine shop, electrical. And we got to look at a car, and I always found cars very complex. But when you look down a little bit farther, a car is made up of a whole bunch of little parts working together. Some of them are, the body's a lot bigger than some of the little gears that you have in there, but all of them together are very complex, but each has its own individual part. And when we come together as a community of faith, working together, whether it is here praising God or whether it is serving out in the community, whether it's serving at a luncheon, each person has a gift that they bring, and they use that gift. And when we all work together, that gift it may not be seen as clearly, but it adds to the care and the transformation that comes. Whether it is caring for someone who is grieving or someone who is sick, whether it is walking with people who are sort of curious and not sure and asking questions and being able to realize that sometimes those questions that they're asking, we've had the same questions. We've had to work through the answers, and we do that together. We can work through questions and come to that answer that is a blessing from God. So when we think about coming together and working together, we're doing so not just to solve a problem. Sometimes we're doing it to make a difference in people's lives. Now, the thing that comes up is I find that it can be very fun to work together. Some people find it stressful to work together. They like doing things their way, their own way. But when we come together, it can be fun to work together. And how can it be fun? How do you think? You can delegate. You can go do the job that I'm secretly saying I don't want to do. Yes. Delegation is very good. How else?
You can have conversation.
You can have conversation. Not just conversation, you can joke with each other. When you're having conversation or joking, it passes the time, so you can get a lot of work done. You don't realize that you've done as much work as you might think. And sometimes I've seen, I don't know if you've ever been part of an environment or a culture where they actually encourage you to have fun while working. You can bring the Nerf gun to the office and shoot it at someone. It's not supposed to be for stress relief, but anyways. You can do things together, and you pass the time together. It makes the work lighter. It makes the work easier to do. And when you're working together and sharing the work, the task isn't as onerous. It isn't as big because you start to break it down. You delegate. You don't have to do the job that you don't want to do. Sometimes you're doing the job and you're happy to do it, but you know it's something that someone else isn't good at. They completely detest it, and you're able to serve them in that way, and you can have fun with it, and just be a blessing to others. There's this video here, and it's a number of videos put together, short videos, showing how teamwork benefits the group. In the video, we saw different aspects of how working together brings protection, it's easier to get the task done. You can work together to accomplish more than you would be by yourselves. In this passage we read from Nehemiah, Nehemiah was one of the people that was taken from Judah, transferred to Babylon. It was working actually for the king, and Babylon got conquered by the Medes and the Persians, and he's working for the king of the Persians at the time, and God lays it on his heart to ask to go back to Jerusalem. He had heard that Jerusalem, the capital of his home country, was still in shambles, and they're starting to think about rebuilding it. And he wanted to be there and to help out. And so Nehemiah goes to the king and asks for leave to go back, and the king grants it and gives him letters and for his safety, to allow him to be going and doing what he wanted to do, and to help with the rebuilding of Jerusalem. And one of the tasks that Nehemiah tasked the people with was rebuilding the wall. So the wall would go around the city to protect the city from invaders. And it was a large city with a large wall to rebuild. But you see, there are people there that didn't want the wall rebuilt because they wanted the status quo to stay the same. They were people that had influence, they had power, and if the wall went up, they wouldn't have the same power, they wouldn't have the same influence. So they were trying to strike fear in Nehemiah and in the people that were rebuilding Jerusalem. They wanted to keep the status quo the same because they didn't want Jerusalem to be rebuilt and for the Jewish people to have that same power that they once had. They were like the big bully on the school ground or at work. The big bully who tries to strike fear into your heart through violence, through lies. But Nehemiah trusted in the Lord, trusted that this is what the Lord was leading him to do. And he brought the people together and he gave them a clear focus. It wasn't just Nehemiah against the bullies or the army of people that the bullies brought against them. He was bringing the people together on a common purpose, as we mentioned before, to rebuild the wall, to rebuild the security, to rebuild an example of God's blessing in their midst. They were called to work together. And Nehemiah brought the people together against the adversity, against the destruction, against the problems that they were facing, and even against fear. That as they stood together, they believed that they would not be overcome. But as you can imagine, that if it was just one or a smaller group, without a common purpose, without hope, that the lies that were being told, the bullies, would have been able to come in and stop the work, to keep the people down. In the video that we saw, there is a number of examples, and the one that I like the best is the one with the crabs, where there's this group of crabs going along, and there's a small crab. And the seagull starts aiming for it. And he knew enough to call his friends, and they came by and they surrounded him. It's easy for an attacker to go for the weakest link or the smallest one. They think that it would be their easy prey. But together, they were able to turn away the seagull. And the example there is the same throughout, whether it's the penguins and the whale, or the ants and the anteater. Together, they were able to stand against the adversity. You've probably heard of the example of breaking a pencil. Most of us can break one. And then you get to 2, it's a little bit harder. 3, it's getting a little bit harder. 4 or 5, it's even harder. And eventually you get it so you cannot break the pencils, because together they are stronger. Together they are able to withstand the force that is being put against them. The same goes for Nehemiah. He realized that bringing the people together, giving them clear purpose, giving them hope, and giving them a job to do, that each had a particular area of the wall that they were doing. There was people working together. Some were doing the work, some were standing guard, some were watching out. And if anyone came to attack, this trumpet would be sounded, and they would all come and rally together. They wouldn't leave this one little group to fight off the big army. See, when they worked together, they stood against the people and the problems that were against them. Together, they were able to do more than they could do by themselves. And this is an important reminder for us. Because there are some times where it seems like it is easier, and especially for myself, it sometimes seems easier to do things by yourself. But when we work together, you can do so much more. When we work together, we see the pieces that God is bringing together, the gifts that God is bringing together, that creates such a beautiful picture. It's an artwork that is being brought together all around us. That is not just what one person can do, but when we work together, we can do so much more. Whether it's thinking about the different things that we do, whether it's the worship service. I don't play the organ very well. I don't play musical instruments very well. I try. Don't get me wrong, I try. But we have musicians here that do so much better than I could ever do. We have singers that have beautiful voices that can sing much better than I can do. And when we do it together, we hear the different parts, which creates a piece that is even more beautiful than just one by itself, because you hear the different nuances. When we are doing lunches or suppers or anything else, whether it's working, fixing something, each of us has different gifts that add to the group. Not one of us is great at everything. Have you ever noticed that? Some of us might think that we are. But each together, we add a quality of a gift that brings such beauty to the work that we are doing. There is a story that I came across this week. It is about a dewdrop. I'm not comparing you all to dewdrops. Not exactly, anyways. But the dewdrop, the story itself, talks about the dewdrop coming in the morning and realizing how good it has it. As the sun rose, the dewdrop became aware of its surroundings. There it sat on a leaf, catching the sunlight and throwing it back out. Proud of its simple beauty, it was very content. Around it were other dewdrops, some on the same leaf, and some on other leaves around about. The dewdrop was sure that it was the best. I don't know if you've ever thought as a dewdrop and thinking that you were the best. Ah, it was good to be a dewdrop. The wind rose and the plant began to shake, tipping the leaf. Terror gripped the dewdrop, and gravity pulled it towards the edge of the leaf, towards the unknown. Why? Why was this happening? Things were uncomfortable. Things were safe. Or things were comfortable. Things were safe. Why did they have to change? Why? I'm thinking we can all relate to that little dewdrop at that moment in time. We live in a life where things are changing all around us. And many times we ask, why do they have to change? Why does it have to be this way? The dewdrop reached the edge of the leaf. It was terrified, certain that it would be smashed into 1,000 pieces below. Sometimes when we face adversity, we think the same thing. When we face the unknown, how could this end anywhere close to being good? The day had only just begun, and the end had come so quickly. It seemed so unfair. It seemed so meaningless. It tried desperately to do whatever it could to cling to the leaf, but it was no use. Finally, it let go, surrendering to the pull of gravity. Down it fell. Below there seemed to be a mirror, a reflection of itself, seemed to be coming up to meet the dewdrop. Closer and closer they came together until finally, and then the fear transformed into deep joy, as a tiny dewdrop merged with the vastness that was the pond. Now the dewdrop was no more, but it was not destroyed. It had become one with the whole. And the story ends with, not one of us is bigger than all of us. We must find joy in being together, not working in silos. We become so much more together than we ever could alone. When we share in our burdens, when we share in our fears, when we share in our joys, we are reminded that we are not alone. That God has placed us into community. He's placed us together to work together, to live together, to share together the blessings that He has given us, to help to carry the load when the load seems too great, to help to bring hope when when at times all that our heart feels is a darkness surrounding us. That is at that time when someone can speak words of hope and life and remind us of God's love for us. By ourselves, it is easy to forget. But when we live and work in community, when we live life together, when we share our faith together, we're reminded that we are not alone. We're reminded of God's faithful love that meets us each and every day. We're reminded of the grace that He gives us at the times when we stumble. He reminds us that we are loved even at the times when we have trouble loving ourselves. Living in community, working together, it is a time of sharing in the blessings, of allowing God's transforming love to be seen and not just felt within the community, but with all those we work together to serve. Whether it's here in the church, whether it's here in Arthur, whether it is around the world. Working together, we fight against lies. We fight against hopelessness. We fight against darkness. We fight against injustice. We fight to share the love that God has given us, to share His faithfulness. Let us pray. Lord, we pray that You remind us of the importance of sharing all that You have given us. Help us to work together. Help us to be one body with many parts. Help us to share in our joys, but also in our struggles. Help us to be able to speak words of hope and the words of truth, even though we might stumble, even though we might fall. We know that You are there to pick us up and help us to remind those that we walk with that they are not alone, that You haven't forgotten us, but You love us dearly each and every day. We pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.